Thanks.
Hello, everyone. It's the third Hacker Hotshots of November, and we're very lucky to have Zaidman, who's the VP product at Paygilent. And I'm sorry if I've pronounced that all wrong. Perhaps you can do a better job when you introduce yourself. So please take it away. If you can introduce yourself, please.
Thanks, Henry. You've pronounced my name and the company's name perfectly.
Good.
I'm Zaidman, VP Product at Paygilant. And in a nutshell, what we do, we prevent mobile fraud. We are an SDK, meaning we are a small piece of code which resides inside a mobile application. It can be a banking application, it can be a retailer application, it can be an e-wallet. Wherever there is a chance of risk or fraud, we are there in order to protect the application.
Fantastic. Excellent. Do you have some slides you can share with us?
Yeah, I'd love to. Cool. So can you see the slide now?
I can see it perfectly.
Great. So as I said, we prevent fraud for mobile banking, for mobile payments, for mobile retailers. We take care of it. A couple of, let's look at the market for a brief moment. We saw that in Q1 2020, there was an increase in fraudulent mobile transaction. Now that makes perfect sense because there's more mobile usage in general. There are more mobile payments being done. There's more mobile banking related and unrelated to COVID-19. And we see this huge spike in mobile banking registrations. And still the banks, the retailers, they all want to keep their experience perfectly seamless, meaning not interrupting with their users with all kinds of passwords and one-time passwords and text messages being sent and then need to be copied to the application. So on one hand, we see how there's more mobile usage, there's more mobile fraud, and on the other hand, you can't just come and try and block everything with very aggressive tools, since then you'll probably damage the user experience. Now, what we see, what we provide eventually is a tool in a box which is very easy to integrate and is meant to handle fraud in mobile. We enable our customers to prevent fraud of many types. We provide a frictionless authentication, meaning we can say it's the exact same user, the exact same device, having a multi-factor authentication done behind the scenes without imposing any obstacles in front of the user. The integration with our tool is very quick, very simple, very easy. It's a matter of 5 working days in order to get our SDK running inside the mobile application. And we provide the protection from day one, meaning there is no need to run our system for months in order to have the system to learning the users, learning the behaviors, just in order to start providing protection. We can provide the protection immediately from the moment we start running. And all this eventually leads to a quick and sharp cut in costs because you are handling less false positives, you have less chargebacks, you have less fraud incidents. So you need less hours of your fraud analysts working on the process. So everything goes down and the costs go down with it. Now, how do we do it? We have what we call our 6 intelligence sets. This is actually the information, the data that we are capturing in order to identify whether an action being done by the user is fraudulent or safe. We look at the device itself, what we call the device DNA. We are looking at the actual mobile device in order to identify it. It's actually the next generation of device fingerprinting. So when we see a device, we know if we have seen it before or not. And in addition, each device has its own unique characteristics. And naturally, fraudulent devices, devices which are used for fraudulent actions, have their own specific characteristics. And we can very quickly identify whether this device is used for fraud purposes or whether it's legitimate. And in a quite similar manner, we look at the user space, meaning the user's environment. Again, a legitimate user would have a different environment than a fraudster, meaning a legitimate user would use their phone for phone calls, for sending messages, for communicating, for running applications, while a fraudster would usually use their device specifically for fraud. So we see how the space is different for each one of them, and we can pinpoint very quickly whether it's about to be used for fraud or for legitimate purposes. We look also at the user's activity inside the application. For example, let's say I have a mobile banking application and I'm a legitimate user. Usually I would log in, look at my balance, look at my current account, spend a bit of time looking at my savings account, and then sometimes move over to transfer money. Now, if we see that same user logging in and rushing to transfer money in less than half a second, we can pinpoint that something here is very out of the ordinary. Looking at this, we can identify potential fraud is about to happen. And we look also at the biomarkers, meaning the user's biometric behavior inside the application. How does the user hold their device, with the right hand or the left hand? Is the user swiping usually with long movements or short movements? Is the user pressing with strong force or weak force? Taking all of this and other indicators into account, we can create a unique biometric profile per user. And it's also a very good way to identify bots. Attacks being made by bots are becoming very common, and naturally a bot wouldn't have the same biometric fingerprint as a human user. We get also insights from the application itself, and taking that into account and cross-referencing with data that we capture on the device and data that we collect from external sources, we can see whether there is a match and it makes sense that indeed this user is indeed a real user and not a fake one. And eventually we look at the transaction itself, whether the amount being sent or paid is according to the user's regular behavior, whether the user's current location makes sense, whether the destination of the money is one that we would expect to see, whether the time of day is according to it. We look at many dimensions here and we cross-reference them. And if we see that everything is a match, it's a good sign. However, if we see that suddenly this user has a burst of many transactions, all being done around 3 a.m. And in a totally different time zone, in a totally different location, well, we can say something here might be wrong. And eventually we collect all of these 6 intelligence sets and provide one single simple risk score, whether the transaction has a low risk score, a medium risk score, or a high risk score. And now the application can choose how to act according to our recommendation. We do not block transactions. We do not approve transactions. We just say how risky it is. And now the application can choose how to act based on our risk score and their business preferences. So eventually, we can enable the application to pass on good transactions. When there are safe users, no need to place additional obstacles such as asking them again for passwords or sending them one-time password, making them use all sorts of authenticators. No need for that. If we say it's a safe transaction, it's safe. No need to bother the user. And if we say it's risky, well, best thing would be probably to decline it or to ask the user for all kinds of step-up authentications. But our response is simple, quick, in real time, so the user can get a true frictionless experience while having the application fully protected.
Fantastic. Very interesting. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a real, I mean, it's fascinating how many kind of data points you can assess, right? Like how many kind of variables out there to, I mean, I guess this all comes down to patterns, right? To sensing any change in a pattern, then does your system solution flag up the concern?
That is correct. Both points you've raised are very relevant here. The usage of multiple intelligence sets is very important, because if we try to rely only on a single one, it might be problematic. I mean, let's look at the biomarkers, which is now a thing. Many companies are focusing on the biometric behavior, which is a great thing. However, let's say I'm now going out for a jog here around the block, and I'm returning here, and now I'm trying to make a transaction. Now, my pulse would be higher, my temperature would be higher, my hand would probably be shaking a bit. My bio profile might seem different than it usually is. Now, does that mean I'm a fraudster? Of course not. So by looking at all of the other factors, if we see it's the same device, it's the same user space, the user's activity in the application is the same, we see all the data matches and the transaction itself is according to patterns, then everything is good. If we see that just the biomarkers are somewhat different, well, it probably means that something happened, but it's not fraud. So only relying on multiple factors can assure that we have a minimal rate of false positives.
Okay. Have you seen an increase in fraud during the COVID pandemic?
Oh, certainly. Now, it might have arrived from many reasons. First, we see more usage in general, and we see more payments being done in general. So naturally, we would see also more fraud. But more than that, such crises, such as pandemics, always cause people to try and perform more fraud. It was totally expected, and we were ready for that. And indeed, we've seen more fraud attempts with our customers during the past few months.
Fantastic. What about, can your solution, does it also detect SIM swapping and, other, I guess, and other concepts like account takeovers, or even new account creation?
Oh, certainly. We are seeing it all the time, and indeed, we see that SIM swapping, which became now very popular among fraudsters as a way of performing an account takeover. In SIM swapping, as you probably know, as a fraudster, I'm now getting some data about my victim. I'm calling the cell provider. I'm pretending to be someone I'm not, and now I'm taking over the SIM, the phone number, which belongs to the victim, and then I take over their account at a banking service, an e-wallet service, any service that relies on sending text messages as a way of authentication. This shows, SIM swapping shows that sending text messages is not as, it has, well, two flaws. First of all, it's a bad user experience. Now the user needs to switch between different applications and memorize numbers and type them in, and it's not really safe. And our solution checks whether indeed it is the same user, the same person trying to log in, trying to perform a transaction. So yes, our solution prevents SIM swapping and solves the issue of account takeover. May it be done using SIM swapping or other ways, including stealing the actual physical device. Now, we have seen recently that new account fraud is on the rise. One of our customers knew that they have a huge problem with new account fraud because they gave a bonus to every new account being opened, which is a very popular and common and totally sensible way of promoting your business. People found out that they can make well, free money by opening accounts, and account opening was very easy there. Again, having a good user experience is something which is desirable. So fraudsters had a very easy way of creating new accounts. They got their bonuses, they liquidated these bonuses, so they've made money out of nothing. So that company called us, and within a day, we found over 6,000 fake accounts in their database, just basing on our data, and that meant saving a huge amount of money for that company. So new account fraud is indeed on the rise now and can be handled, and our solution covers it.
That's very interesting. And tell me one thing, what is the, just kind of like out of interest, is there a platform that you find more challenging, Android or Apple, iOS? I mean, do you find, because I know that with Android, you have emulators, right? Where you can kind of spoof your GP coordinates and all of that. I guess my question is, I mean, it's constantly a cat and mouse game, right? I mean, are you kind of always having to understand what the black world is up to, and sort of seeing what software is out there? So my question in summary is, do you find it more of a challenge to work with Android or with Apple, or the same thing?
Well, it's a great question. Indeed, it's a cat and mouse game, or I call it an arms race.
Yes.
The fraudsters are trying to find new ways of attack, and the anti-fraud companies are trying to prevent them, and also guess what would be the next step of the fraudsters in order to prevent them as well. And indeed, you see how fraudsters are indeed focusing on Android, making it a much more interesting platform to handle. And indeed, the emulators is a tool which is used by fraudsters, and indeed they can spoof many things there. They can try and spoof their MAC address. They can try and spoof their location. They can easily create fake new devices in a minute. However, as you said, it's a cat and mouse game. And here we are constantly being on the edge, and we are well aware of that. So we have many other ways to identify emulators. So we see the location looks okay, the other parameters and properties look okay, but we know of specific, let's call it fingerprints or all kinds of, let's call it stains that the emulators leave behind them. So during the transaction itself, we can see in real time, everything here looks okay, but it's an emulator. Now, a legitimate user would not use an emulator. So once we see it's an emulator, the risk score goes up, and we flag it as risky. And indeed, emulators are being used as a tool, and we know how to identify them. And as you said, cat and mouse, each time we see how they're trying to improve their emulators and trying to hide the fact that it's an emulator, and then we move forward and find another way to identify that it's not a real person.
That's very interesting. What about how do you see the future of your company?
Well, we as a company, we chose a very specific way. There are many anti-fraud companies, and they're great, and they're doing a swell job. But what differentiates us is that we focus on mobile. It's very clear to us that the future is in mobile, and we can see it in the past few years. We've seen the movement from brick and mortar to web, and now we see the movement from web to mobile. Many companies try to cover it all, try to handle point of sale and cover web and general online, but we focus specifically on mobile, which makes us really the best one in this specific field. So as we see that mobile is on the rise, and we see that mobile fraud is on the rise, we see how our company, we expect it to be on the rise as well.
Excellent, great stuff. Well, it's certainly a very interesting company you have, and we wish you all the best. Thanks for keeping us safe and decreasing fraud, which nobody likes their bank accounts being emptied. So thanks very much for that.
Thank you. And indeed, we are all together in this.
Yes.
As the good guys, we know we all need to succeed together. Thanks a lot.
Fantastic. Thanks again. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks a lot.